Chapter 1. The Broken Throne. Snow and ash fell together like gray confetti over the crumbling towers of Karak Varn, mixing into a slush that painted the ancient hold in the colors of decay. The once glorious stronghold, nestled in the jagged bones of the Black Mountains, was a mausoleum of its former self. Iron-wrought statues stood broken, their helms split, their beards chipped by time and siege. The banners of Clan Grudgebearer, once vivid red and gold, hung tattered and pale in the bitter wind. Inside the Hall of Thrones, a deep silence hung, thick, oppressive, ancient. Coal torches sputtered with blue flame, casting long shadows across carved columns, depicting Dawi ancestors in their eternal grim vigil. The great throne itself, a masterpiece of adamantine and rune-carved stone, lay cracked down its spine. Its split seat looked less a royal perch and more a broken promise. Drazrung Grudgebearer stood before it, motionless, wrapped in a thick fur cloak that clung with frost. His beard, bound in twin iron rings, reached his belt, and his dark eyes flickered not with sorrow, but smoldering anger. Around him stood the throng of mourning, his shield-bearers, runesmiths, and the last of the Stoneblood anvils, his war council, all silent, all watching. In his calloused hands, Drazrung held the iron oath-axe, the ancestral weapon of his line. Its edge was notched from generations of battle, its haft blackened from flame and blood. He gazed upon the broken throne, and for a moment the storm outside howled louder, like the wind itself mourned. "They broke it," he growled at last, his voice rough like gravel dragged over steel. "They broke him, my father. They broke Karak Varn." The old runesmith, Thoric Lodestone, stepped forward. His beard was white as snow, braided in copper wire. "Aye, they did, my king. The Grobi poured through the lower mines like a plague. Your father held them back at the cost of his life. His beard lies in the Book of Grudges. You shall add more to it." Drazrung turned, his jaw clenched so tight it looked carved from granite. "More than a grudge. A reckoning." As if summoned by his words, a distant horn blast echoed through the caverns. A harsh sound, raw and deep. Not dwarven, not kin. "Ragda," hissed one of the shield-bearers. Another blast, then another. Closer now, 3 pulses, war drums. The drunken snapped to readiness, shields locked, axes drawn. Runes flared on armor as Thoric began chanting in Kazalid, invoking the ancestors' strength. Drazrung stepped down from the dais and marched past the broken throne. Each step echoed with iron purpose. He flung the cloak from his shoulders, revealing rune-inscribed scale mail, battered but gleaming with fresh oil and blood rites. His helm, shaped like a roaring forge fire, was clasped onto his head by his lieutenants. "On the shield wall at the Gate of Chains," he ordered. "No goblin or orc crosses our threshold." They marched into the dark. The Gate of Chains was a hellish bottleneck of crumbled stone and rusted machinery, the last functioning inner gate of Karak Varn. Behind it, families and smiths huddled in the vaults. Ahead, shadows writhed. With a shriek of iron and wet screeches, the greenskins came, a tide of filth and fury. Goblins with jagged spears and cruel grins charged under a rain of flaming arrows. Behind them, orc boys with blackened armor and fang-filled maws slammed into the dwarven shield wall. The impact sounded like mountains colliding. Drazrung roared, "Kazuk! Kazokita!" and swung the oath-axe in a thunderous arc, splitting a goblin from clavicle to hip, entrails spilling in a steaming heap. He pivoted, axe haft cracking into a second goblin's temple, snapping bone like a dried twig. The dwarf held, shoulder to shoulder, axes biting low. One orc broke through, massive, scarred, wielding a cleaver the size of a tower shield. It bellowed and raised its blade, then exploded in a burst of flame as Thoric's rune of immolation detonated beneath its feet, sending blackened chunks flying. But still they came, over bodies, over fire, over stone and steel. One of Drazrung's lieutenants, Balin Cragjaw, was pulled into the tide. Goblins swarmed him, stabbing with spears, hacking with crude blades. Drazrung roared and barreled into the fray, knocking goblins aside like rag dolls. He seized Balin dead-eyed and bleeding from a dozen wounds, and hurled a throwing axe into the throat of the goblin chief. The creature gurgled, blood spraying in jets, and collapsed, twitching. "Back! Fall back to the second gate," Drazrung shouted, even as blood streamed down his cheek from a fresh gash. The dwarves withdrew in grim order, dragging their wounded, leaving the gate soaked in gore and littered with the twisted, smoking bodies of their enemies. The Grobi jeered and shrieked in triumph, howling war cries that echoed like a sick joke. Back in the keep, Drazrung knelt by the stone dais of the broken throne, soaked in blood not all his own. He placed the oath axe across his knees and whispered a prayer to Grungni and Valaya. "This throne may be broken," he said, his voice low, deadly calm. "But I am not. Let them come. I will grind their bones to mortar and reforge my kingdom from the ashes of their corpses." Outside, thunder rolled, as if the gods themselves heard the vow. In the Book of Grudges, a fresh line was carved that night. "By extant oath, the Grobi shall pay tenfold for the throne of Karak Varn." Chapter 2. Rune of a Dream. The fires of Karak Varn's forges still sputtered, but only out of stubbornness, like old men coughing smoke rather than breath. The clang of hammers echoed hollowly in the depths, a ghost of the glory that once rang through these stone arteries. After the bloodletting at the Gate of Chains, King Drazrung Grudgebearer bore his silence like a second helm. The fallen had been burned with iron rites, their ashes sealed in vaults of basalt. The Krubi were beaten back, but Drazrung knew it was not a victory, merely a pause. The king walked alone that night, deep into the forgotten guts of Karak Varn, deeper than even the oldest maps dared mark. No torches. Only the dull red glow of fungi clinging to damp walls and the low hum of ancient machinery that hadn't stirred in centuries. He wore no armor, only his runed robe and his axe slung across his back. He was not a warrior here, not yet. He was a seeker. The Hall of Forgotten Chains was a relic in itself, a long-buried chamber buried beneath collapsed vaults and rivers of time. Its iron-bound doors were sealed in 7 locks, each opened by a key of lost heritage, rune tokens passed down through his bloodline. His father never spoke of it, nor had his grandfather, but in Drazrung's dreams he had seen it. The dream had returned for 6 nights. A whisper in Khazalid, a storm of gold flame, an anvil that pulsed like a heart between worlds. Always he awoke with soot on his hands and the sound of hammers still ringing in his ears. Tonight, the 7th lock turned with a deep, grinding groan. Rust flaked off like scabs from a wound. The doors opened inward with the sound of grinding centuries. Inside, the chamber was lined in obsidian and gold-veined granite, its domed ceiling supported by statues of forgotten kings, each with faces too worn to recognize. They held up the ceiling not with pride, but with the exhaustion of eternity. In the center stood a pedestal of black steel, and on it rested a single object, a rune soul, rolled tight, sealed with a clasp shaped like a hammerhead. Its edges shimmered faintly, etched with the symbols of the ancestor gods. Drazrung approached, each footstep a drumbeat. When he touched the scroll, the stone beneath him trembled ever so slightly, and a wind blew through the sealed chamber. A wind from nowhere. As his fingers unlatched the clasp, the runes on the scroll flared not with light, but memory. His vision darkened. The world changed. He stood in a space without time, A forge surrounded him, not built of stone or steel, but of star fire and divine breath. The sky overhead burned with the light of suns long dead, and every hammerfall echoed like thunder across the void. At the center of this impossible forge was the Anvil of the Ancestors, massive beyond comprehension, glowing with the molten power of creation itself. A bearded figure, taller than any dwarf, wreathed in flame and shadow, raised a hammer the size of a tower and brought it down onto the anvil. Boom. Reality quaked. The sound tore through Drazrung's bones like lightning. With every strike, the anvil birthed runes into existence, floating symbols of power that spun in the air like molten glyphs. They spoke in a voice not of sound, but of intent, said that fates are hard, and fools, fate anew. The Indian standard blood of kings, fire of will, bound by oath. Then the figure turned, its eyes like twin furnaces, and looked upon Drazrung. You are the seventh son of the seventh line, the last link in the broken chain. Will you bear the rune of dream? I will, Drazrung. The figure lifted a single rune, the oldest of them all. It burned in the shape of a hammer within a mountain, and as it drifted toward him, Drazrung felt his chest burn, searing agony like molten metal poured through his veins. He screamed, but the pain had purpose. The rune branded itself into his soul. Drazrung collapsed to his knees, panting. The scroll lay unfurled before him now, its runes rearranged into prophecy. In the north, where sky and stone bleed, lies the Anvil of the Ancestors, guarded by madness, forged by gods, claimed by none. Seek the rune path, forge the will, become the Anvil-King. He was shaking, sweat and blood beading his brow. His hands trembled not with fear, but reverence. The mark burned beneath his chest plate like a second heart. Not ink, not metal, a divine rune alive within him. From the shadows of the chamber, the runesmith Thoric Lodestone stepped forward. He had followed in silence, unseen, unheard. He said nothing, merely looked upon the scroll and bowed his head. You saw it, he muttered. You heard the forge. Drazrung rose to his feet. Aye, he said, and I mean to find it. Thoric's voice was barely above a whisper. The last who tried never returned. The rune path is madness. Then we walk it, Drazrung replied. We walk it, or we rot here beneath a mountain of bones and grudges. He rolled the scroll, bound it once more, and turned toward the darkness. The rune within him pulsed again, in rhythm with a forge far beyond the mortal world. And the broken king began to dream of fire. Chapter 3. Council of Stone. The high hall of Karak Varn was colder than the grave. Though massive hearths flanked the chamber, burning with enchanted coals older than empires, the chill that hung in the air was not of temperature, it was the frost of tradition, of stubborn pride, of ancient disappointment that no fire could thaw. The Council of Stone had gathered, their armors more ceremonial than practical, though each counselor wore weapons at their sides out of habit and principle. A dozen long-bearded dwarfs of venerable age and venerable ego sat upon thrones of rune-carved granite, arranged in a half-circle around the broken central dais. Behind them, reliefs of great deeds carved into the walls watched in silence. Ancestral glories, wars won, holds founded, grudges avenged, all of it, a stark contrast to the reality of Karak Varn's decay. At the heart of the dais stood King Drazrung, Grudgebearer, one hand on the haft of the iron oath axe, the other gripping the scroll of divine runescript retrieved from the sealed vault. The hall echoed with the last ringing of the Dawnhammer bell, signaling the beginning of the debate. Silence settled for a heartbeat, until it was shattered by the voice of Thane Corlic Blackspine, his beard braided in thick knots of obsidian beads. "This is madness," Corlic growled, rising from his throne like a boulder shifting. "My king, with respect, you stand before us speaking of a dream, and from this you would lead our people into the north, into chaos-cursed lands?" Several councillors grunted their agreement, thumping their axes into the floor in emphasis. Drazrung didn't flinch. "I speak of more than dreams, Corlac. I hold a prophecy, burned into my soul by the forge of the ancestor gods themselves. I have seen the anvil of the ancestors. I heard the hammerfall of creation. The time of waiting has passed. The time of forging has come." Thane Drachna Emberfist, matriarch of the Forge Keepers, spat onto the stone at her feet. "You speak of hearsay, not prophecy. Many dwarfs have claimed to see visions after too much black brew or deepstone fungus. Shall we all go chasing tales now while the Grobi chew at our gates?" Drazrung unrolled the scroll and raised it. The runes upon it flared with sudden brilliance, golden symbols dancing across the stone like sparks from a smith's strike. The council drew back instinctively, shields raised, eyes narrowed. The runes moved, living fire, twisting into symbols known only to the oldest runesmiths. "My Gratney's beard," muttered Thoric Lodestone, stepping from behind the throne. "These runes are real. The scroll is older than our oldest books. It speaks not in metaphor, but in rune logic. No delusion, no myth." "Even so," Corlic snapped, regaining his bluster. "You would leave Karak Varn, leave us exposed to Grobi filth and worse? For what? A forge that may never be found?" Drazrung's voice was steel. "Not leave. Prepare. Arm. Forge unity in the flame of purpose. Karak Varn festers, core-like. Every year we bury more warriors than we name children. Our forges grow cold, our grudges grow long, and yet we do nothing but cling to crumbling stone and fading memory." He stepped forward, placing the scroll on the central altar of the dais, then removed his gauntlet and drew a dagger of silver steel from his belt. Without hesitation, he drew it across his palm. Blood flowed dark and thick, steaming in the hall's chill. "I swear it now," he said, voice echoing, resonant with ancestral weight. "By my blood, by my axe, by my oath, I shall find the anvil of the ancestors. I shall forge the rune of renewal, or I shall die upon the anvil myself." He turned from the dais and strode the length of the hall toward the rear alcove, toward the massive, towering statue of Grune, father of smiths, carved from soulstone and wrapped in rusted chains of symbolic burden. The god's eyes, set with twin sapphires the size of fists, watched in impassive judgment. Drazrung knelt at the statue's base. His blood dripped onto the oath slab, an ancient altar never touched save for the most sacred vows. He placed his hand, palm down and bleeding, upon it. "Let Grune judge me," he whispered. "If my cause is false, let the stone strike me down." The hall held its breath. Nothing happened. No quake, no flame, no voice from on high. But the air grew heavy, oppressive, like the pressure before a cave-in. The brazier fires dimmed, casting the chamber in near darkness. Then, with a sudden clang, the chains upon Grune's statue snapped, falling in a heap around the statue's feet, as if struck from within by some unseen hammer. A gasping chorus erupted from the council. Thoric Lodestone fell to one knee. "It is answered," he whispered. "The Godfather has heard." Silence again. But this time, it was not disbelief. It was fear. Corlic Blackspine sat slowly, visibly shaken. "If this is true, if the path lies north." Drazrung rose from the oath slab. "Then Karak Varn must awaken. The rune path awaits." One by one, the councillors gave nods, not all in agreement, but all in submission to fate. Whether blessed or cursed, the path had been chosen. And Drazrung Grudgebearer, blood still dripping from his palm, turned toward the darkened halls of his forefathers and began to gather his company. The Council of Stone was broken. The king's oath had been cast into the forge of destiny. Chapter 4. The First Rune Quester. The forges of Karak Varn roared to life. For the first time in a generation, black smoke rose from the chimneys of the Iron Quarter like a war banner unfurled. The hammers of the deep rang day and night, shaping not just steel but purpose. Word of King Drazrung's divine oath spread like fire through the mountain's veins. Among the old and weary, suspicion festered. Among the young and hungry, hope ignited. Drazrung knew that oaths were nothing without those willing to carry them into the jaws of death. He would need warriors, not just any warriors, but those forged by exile, pain, brilliance, and madness. Not a shield wall of tradition-bound thanes, but a blade of misfits honed for a single purpose: to seek the anvil of the ancestors and shape a new dawn upon it. He would name them the Rune Questers. The first he found in the Cavern of Skulls, the blood-stained pit where disgraced dwarves sought either redemption or death. He came upon the arena during a blood duel. 2 slayers, half-naked, painted with ochre and spite, trading axe blows that peeled flesh like bark from trees. One fell with a scream, his leg hacked clean through, but the victor did not celebrate. He stood motionless, blood steaming on his chest, bright orange hair bound into a ridged mohawk, stiff with clotted gore. His eyes were pits of despair and rage, a furnace without fuel. "Kargan Drake Duraj, son of Thoric Stoneheart," the pitmaster muttered. "Killed his kin in a brawl over gold, took the slayer's oath, slayed a troll single-handed. Won't die, won't speak. Been fighting like this for 4 years." Drazrung walked into the arena, axe unbuckled. Kargwin raised his brow as the king approached, but his gaze remained empty. "You seek death," Drazrung said. "Good. I offer it, at the hands of monsters, daemons, or gods. Or you find purpose in pain, find glory, maybe even forgiveness." He tossed the rune scroll at Kargan's feet. The slayer looked down. The runes flared gold. Kargan picked up the scroll, stared, and finally spoke, voice a rasp of old coals. "I'll follow, so long as we die loud." The second was found in the bowels of the engine fane, beneath grinding gears and the scent of scorched brass. There, in the smoke-choked belly of the mountain, Erde Copperlock, master engineer and rogue inventor, worked without permission, without sleep, and without regard for safety. She was a whirlwind of soot and fury, barely 5 feet tall, wrapped in a patchwork of leathers and scorched chainmail. When Drazrung arrived, her latest creation, a rune-stabilized gyrocannon, exploded in a thunderclap of flame, throwing gears across the room and knocking him into a wall. She didn't apologize, just narrowed her soot-smeared eyes. "You're the one waking the gods," she muttered. "Figures. You'll come with me," he said, coughing smoke. "I might," she shrugged, wiping oil from her brow. "But I don't take orders. I build death. And if your quest is real, it'll need 1,000 deaths before the end." "That's why I came," Drazrung replied, standing. "You make weapons. I'll give you war." Erde grinned. "Good. Now duck." Another explosion shook the chamber. The third was less expected. He came not from stone halls, but from beyond the mountains, wrapped in wool and wonder. Lucian Vall, a human scholar from the colleges of Altdorf, seeking knowledge of pre-Sigmarite dwarf kind. Lucian arrived during a rare moment of peace, striding into Karak Varn's gates with ink-stained fingers and a satchel bulging with forbidden texts. The guards nearly slew him on sight until he began speaking Khazalid fluently. He requested an audience with Drazrung and offered something the king couldn't ignore, a fragmented map of the northern Chaos wastes marked with dwarf script and a sigil matching the rune on the divine scroll. "I've spent 10 years decoding it," Lucien said, eyes gleaming behind spectacles. "It matches ruins north of Kislev. Abandoned even by chaos, the place isn't marked on any modern chart. I believe it's a dimensional boundary, an ancient dwarf-forged station." Drazrung narrowed his eyes. "Why tell me?" Lucien hesitated. "Because I dream of it. The hammer, the fire. I hear the anvil. And I believe this is bigger than history. This is fate." Drazrung offered him a place beside the slayer and the engineer. Lucien accepted without blinking. The last was found in the rune silences, a place of exile where disgraced runesmiths spent their final days in shame, their voices sealed by vow, their tools broken. There Drazrung sought Valtry's stoneglyph, once apprenticed to the high rune lord of Karak, cast out for attempting to forge a living rune, an abomination in the eyes of the priests. He was pale, gaunt, wrapped in a robe of ash cloth, and his beard had gone white far too early. "I know what you want," Valtry said when Drazrung entered. "I saw the chains fall from Grunni's statue. I heard the hammer." "You are a heretic," Drazrung said. "Yes, and a genius." Valtry didn't respond. "I need you," Drazrung said, "to read the rune path, to walk it, to survive it, to forge what no other could." "And if I fall into madness again?" Valtry asked softly. "Hang it, then I'll kill you myself." Valtry's eyes glittered. "Then I accept." Thus the rune questers were forged. A king with a vision burned into his soul. A slayer with no fear of death. An engineer with fire in her veins. A human with secrets etched in blood and ink. Exiled runesmith seeking redemption in forbidden runes. They stood before the broken throne, beneath the sapphire gaze of Grune, each placing a hand upon the oath slab. "We swear it. By fire, by stone, by blood. We walk the rune path. We seek the anvil. Or we die in its shadow." The chamber trembled, and the gods listened. Chapter 5. The Map of Magmortak. Snow lashed at their cloaks like claws. The wind howled through the shattered peaks of the Black Mountains as the runequesters descended into the jagged teeth of Zufbar's ruin, the once mighty hold now reduced to a necropolis of silence and rust. Frost coated the outer gates, thick as armor plating, and the stone path into the hold's depths had long since split beneath avalanches and time. Where once fires of industry burned day and night, only ice reigned. Drazrung led the company down through a cleft opened by an ancient quake, boots crunching on bones half buried in snow, bones of dwarfs, their beards frozen mid-scream. The main halls were worse. Zufbar had died badly. Signs of siege were everywhere, blackened runes defaced by clawed hands, barricades shattered from within, and the stench of long-dried gore clinging like a second skin to the stone. Steel shields were embedded in walls, fused by heat. Scorch marks lined the ceiling like smoke tongues. They found the bodies of fire-scorched dwarfs in tight defensive rings, slain by blade, claw, or worse. Erda muttered, "This wasn't orcs. This was deeper." Lucien knelt by one of the corpses, examining its melted armor and scorched runes. "Daemon fire," he said grimly. "Runes burned inward. I've read about it. Only the most ancient cursed flames do that." They moved with caution, deeper into the hold. Kargan took point, eyes ever forward, axe twitching in his hand. He never spoke, only grunted when he saw signs of movement. The Grand Archive vaults lay behind the Hall of Iron Echoes, a place said to hold the blueprints and maps of 1,000 lost forges. But the way was choked with rubble, and worse, something had nested there. The stench struck them first, putrid decay, sulfur, and ash. Then came the sound, slithering but heavy. Not water, not flesh, something wrong. A shuddering hiss echoed through the chamber ahead. "Ready," Drazrung growled. They advanced through a fractured door. Inside the archive was a catacomb of shattered shelves, scrolls incinerated or gnawed into pulp. Amid the wreckage was a nest of scorched bones, and within it coiled a monstrosity. It had once been a dwarf, or resembled one, a bloated, hairless thing with molten skin and runes carved into its flesh. Its lower body had fused into a serpentine tail of magma, and its fingers had become hooked claws of obsidian. His eyes were empty sockets, and yet it saw them. He screamed. Hayton rose to his feet. It surged forward like liquid fire, claws tearing stone, hurling itself at the group. Kargan was first, swinging his axe with a roar. It glanced off the creature's flesh with a hiss, spraying molten blood that ate through his pauldrons like acid. Kargan howled, falling back. Malfrey chanted a rune prayer, inscribing glyphs in the air that flared and locked the creature in place for a heartbeat, long enough for Drazrung to charge. He drove the iron oath axe into the diamond host's chest. There was a blinding explosion of fire and force. The beast screeched, the runes in its flesh sparking like wildfire. It slammed its claws into Drazrung's side, tearing through his mail, ribs cracking audibly. Before it could strike again, Erda hurled a rune-charged grenade into the thing's mouth. The explosion tore the demon host apart in a shower of molten gore, its death scream echoing down the centuries. Lucien pulled Drazrung from the wreckage. The king was bleeding, coughing blood, but alive. They burned what remained of the creature with sacred oil and recited the names of the fallen. Then, deeper into the vaults. They found it in a collapsed subchamber behind a sealed sarcophagus of black steel, etched with a name so old not even Thoric Lodestone's lore recalled it. Karim of the First Flame. Within, beneath dust and centuries, lay a map case, rune-locked, preserved in enchanted oil. Balthree opened it with a whispered invocation. The map unfurled, delicate and glimmering. The parchment shimmered like fresh-forged steel. Ink traced vast distances, across the Empire, beyond Kislev, through the Troll Country and into the blackened void beyond. There, at the edge of the known world, marked with a sigil matching the rune within Drazrung's soul, was a symbol none had seen in living memory. The forged sigil of Magmortak, the anvil beyond the veil. It pulsed faintly on the page, as if drawing breath. Lucien traced it with a gloved hand, eyes wide. This predates even the first Karaks. It's not just a forge. It's a place where the veil between realms is thin. Time, space, fate, twisted by hammer and fire. It shouldn't exist. And yet, Drazrung spoke, voice hoarse from blood and awe. It does, and we go to it. They sealed the map again. The air was thick with soot and magic. No one spoke as they began their ascent. But all of them felt it. The pull of the rune, the weight of destiny. And in the silence of Jufbar's corpse, something deep beneath the stone stirred, watching, waiting, awakening. Chapter 6. Through Groby Lands. The hold had no name anymore. His true title had long been gouged out from stone tablets and torn from clan records, replaced by curses and muttered slurs whispered in Karak Varn's taverns. The Dawi called it only the Black Maw, and even that was spoken with contempt. Once a thriving trade-hold carved into the flanks of the western mountains, it had fallen to the Grobi generations ago. Now it was a festering cancer beneath the rock, a maze of filth-choked tunnels, spore-blood chambers, and walls painted in blood and shit, defiled by a tide of green-skin madness. But it was also the quickest route north, shaving weeks off their journey and avoiding the chaos-tainted surface passes. A risk. A necessary one. They entered under the cloak of night, slipping through a forgotten fissure that wound down into the bowels of the desecrated hold. The air grew rancid, thick with rot and smoke, each breath tasting of bile and fungus. Faint echoes of shrieking laughter and stomping boots carried through the tunnels like warped music. Erda spat black phlegm onto the stone. "Smells like a troll's arse down here." Lucien coughed, his face wrapped in oiled cloth. "The fungi are toxic. Spore clouds in the larger chambers. Don't linger." They moved in tight formation, Kargan up front, axe ready, Drazrung behind, every footfall a quiet promise of murder. Erda watching their flanks, her pistons humming. Valtteri whispering warding runes as they passed crude effigies of bones and teeth lashed together with sinew. Lucien marked their path with chalk and prayer. 2 days of crawling through that stinking maze, fighting off spiders the size of oxen, avoiding goblin hunting packs and squig nests, brought them to the Rotgut Arena, a vast pit ringed in glowing mushrooms, black iron spikes, and a crude throne built from bones and dwarfen shields. Here they were found. A skirmish band of night goblins, lean and pale with eyes like silver coins, emerged from the shadows, spears raised, gibbering in a mix of Khazalid and screeching Gork speak. Kargan met their charge with a roar, burying his axe into the lead goblin's jaw, splitting it in two with a wet crack. Blood sprayed in a black mist as the body crumpled. The rest didn't run. More poured in, dozens, clawing, slashing. Spears rattled against Drazrung's armor, one slipping beneath a pauldron to gash his shoulder. He turned, crushed the attacker's skull with his shield, and spun the oath axe into another's chest. Ribs burst like firewood. Erda's shot rang out like a thunderclap, blasting a goblin in half with her repeating pistol. The chamber became a whirlwind of blood and steel, shrieking Grobi and grim-faced dwarfs trading butchery in the flickering mushroom glow. Lucien was dragged down by 3, stabbed in the leg. He screamed. One raised a rusted blade, and its head exploded in a burst of light. Valtteri stood, his rune staff humming with raw energy, eyes glowing with forbidden fire. Runes blazed across the stone floor. The goblins hesitated, suddenly uncertain. That's when he appeared. From behind the throne, a small, wiry goblin in a cloak of patchwork rags stepped into view. One eye was blind and milk-white, the other sharp and gleaming. He carried no weapon, only a gnarled staff carved from a squig bone and adorned with the shrunken head of a dwarf. But the other goblins stopped attacking. Instantly, the small one grinned. "No, now, lads," he rasped in broken Khazalid. "No need to ruin the fun. Guests, after all." Drazrung raised his axe. "Speak fast, Grobi, or bleed faster." The goblin bowed low, mockingly. "Name's Skarnik. Me? I'm what you might call an opportunist. You lot, you're looking for a way through, aye? Not here to raise and burn." "Not yet," Drazrung said. "Then perhaps," Skarnik continued, circling them like a jackal, "you might benefit from a guide, one who knows the ways, one who hates the current lot of scum who rule this hole." Lucien coughed blood. "Why help us?" Skarnik's grin widened. "'Cause I hate 'em more than you do. Boss Mungrub took my squig, fed my mates to the spiders, made me watch. I want him dead, real dead, slowly. You do that, I'll get you through the maw." Drazrung stepped forward, towering over him. "You betray us, goblin. I'll skin your soul before your hide." Skarnik didn't blink. "Fair deal." They struck at dawn, the Grobies' least alert time. Skarnik led them through refuse tunnels and shadowed arches, avoiding squig herds and collapsing fungus halls. The stink grew worse as they neared the Throne of Rot, a chamber reeking of blood, mushrooms, and madness. Boss Mungrub was huge for a goblin, draped in patchwork armor, riding a massive albino squig with a jaw like a bear trap. He was holding a trial, laughing, as a terrified goblin was slowly lowered into a cauldron of squig bile. The ambush was swift and brutal. Kagon launched himself into the nearest crowd, cleaving through 5 in seconds, spraying entrails and bone. Erda's gun barked flame, punching through shields and heads alike. Valtry raised a rune of binding and crushed 2 goblins flat with invisible force, their bodies popping like overripe fruit. Drone barreled straight for Mungra. The albino squig lunged at him, its teeth biting into his shield and tearing it away. The king rolled beneath its gaping maw, came up and drove the oath axe up through its throat. It gurgled, flailing, vomiting acid and blood before crashing down in death throes. Mungram screeched, tried to run, but Skarnik was there. With a snarl, he drove a poisoned shiv into Mungrub's kidney, then another into his groin. The boss howled, twisted, clawing at Skarnik, but the little goblin danced away, slicing again and again until the bigger Groby collapsed in a twitching, mewling heap. "Now that's what I call justice," Skarnik hissed, spitting on the corpse. The rest of the goblins scattered like rats. The maw was leaderless, and chaos would follow. Drazrung turned to Skarnik. "You've earned your place. Guide us out." Skarnik nodded, face still spattered with blood. North tunnel, deep and narrow, no squigs, just spiders. Their lives. He grinned. "I hate spiders." They passed through the Grovy lands, soaked in blood and the promise of darker paths ahead. Above them, the mountains groaned. Behind them, the Mao began to eat itself, echoed in my head. The chaos wastes loomed. Chapter 7. The Iron Watchers. The path wound upward through veins of forgotten stone. Carved long before memory, long before even the fall of the Karaks, the tomb of Durek Hearthforged lay beyond the threshold of light and time. The rune questers climbed narrow switchbacks etched into the walls of an obsidian chasm, each step echoing through the void like a hammer on hollow steel. Below, mist churned, black mist, alive with flickers of runes and phantoms. Above, the air grew thin and sharp. Skarnik, ever pale beneath his greasy skin, refused to pass the threshold. "Not going up there," he rasped, shrinking back into his cloak. "Stone don't breathe right. Smells angry. You go if you like. I'll be waiting down here with me blades and bladder full." With a shrug, Erda muttered, "Better for us. He'd probably piss on the wrong rune anyway." The entrance awaited. Massive, cyclopean doors stood recessed into the cliff face, sealed with 3 concentric rings of stone inscribed in First Forge runes, symbols so old even Valtry had to squint and guess at their meanings. The carvings depicted dwarfs without eyes, faces hidden behind full helms, holding hammers that bled fire and axes that struck down gods. "This tomb predates even Karak's founding," he muttered, reverent. "A time of living metal. Soul hammers, thought forges. This is forbidden." Drazrung ignored him. He stepped forward and placed his palm on the outer ring. The runes flared gold. A humming began, low and deep, vibrating in their bones like the slow inhale of a sleeping behemoth. Stone ground against stone, dust and age tumbling like snow from the seams. The doors opened, and the darkness breathed. Inside, the tomb was a cathedral of metal. The walls were shaped from seamless alloy, etched in spiraling runes that shifted as they walked, changing language and meaning with each step. Heatless fire danced in sconces of crystal, casting flickering shadows that did not match the movement of the living. Great pillars rose like tree trunks of iron, and between them stood the Iron Watcher. There were 7 of them, each over 8 feet tall, shaped like dwarf warriors but made entirely of rune-etched steel and black stone. Their helms were sealed, eyes glowing with a dull blue fire. They did not move. Yet, Lucian's breath caught. Automata, sentinels of the First Age, thought to be myth. "They are not myth," said Valthree grimly. "They are tests. Guardians forged with ancestors' souls and machine craft. We walk in trial's shadow." At the center of the hall rose a sarcophagus of polished obsidian, shaped like a forge halter. Atop it, a hammer was enshrined in crystal. The name inscribed into the stone read, "Karak, hearth-forged, he who tempered the sky." Drazrung stepped forward. The instant his boot touched the dais, the Iron Watchers moved. Their heads turned in unison, gears grinding, limbs unlocking with the clatter of ancient engineering. They did not speak. Instead, the runes flared across the floor, forming a glowing script that twisted like fire across the stone. "Worthy may pass, weak shall break. Prove heart, prove craft, prove flame." Erda swore, "I hate tests." The first Watcher raised a fist and slammed it into the ground. A ring of fire flared out, trapping Drazrung and Kargan within a circle of burning gold. Trial 1, prove heart. The Watcher drew a rune blade the size of a plowshare. It strode forward, slow, deliberate, no roar, no taunt, just intent. Kargan surged forward, but the blade caught him mid-charge, the flat slamming into his chest with a force that snapped ribs and threw him 10 feet back, bouncing across stone like a rag doll. Drazrung didn't wait. He met the construct's charge head-on, his oath axe crashing into the rune blade in a blast of sparks and magic recoil. The Watcher fought with a methodical fury, each strike precise, overwhelming. Drazrung ducked, weaved, slammed the axe into the Watcher's knee joint. Sparks, no damage. He turned, drove its fist into his gut. Bones cracked. Drazrung bellowed, slammed his axe into its faceplate, runes exploding, fragments of the helm shearing off. The Watcher staggered. Drazrung struck again and again until the helm shattered, revealing a shriveled dwarf face within, pale and dead-eyed, set in brass sockets. With a cry of wrath and reverence, he buried the axe into the skull. The Watcher collapsed in a heap of molten parts. The fire circle vanished. Trial 1 passed. Trial 2, prove craft. The second Watcher approached Erda and Valthree, dropping a puzzle box of golden plates and living runes at their feet. It hissed a challenge in a dialect older than speech. "Forge the song, unlock the shape, create truth from flame." Erda's eyes sparkled with manic joy. Finally, something fun. She cracked her knuckles and got to work, her tools whirring as she adjusted lenses and reconfigured runes. Valthree chanted runic formulae, binding logic to symbols, whispering to the metal like a priest to his gods. The puzzle fought back, literally. When they made a wrong move, needle-like spines shot from the metal, slicing into Erda's hand. Blood sprayed. She didn't flinch. "Just a tickle," she hissed, grinning. Runes realigned. The box began to glow. Then shudder. Then sing. A low, harmonic tone pulsed through the chamber as the box unfolded into a shape not meant for mortal minds, a sphere of runes folding within itself infinitely. The watcher stepped back and bowed. Trial 2 passed. Trial 3. Prove flame. Lucian stepped forward, though trembling. The third watcher lowered its hand to the scholar's chest. He gasped, staggered. "What's happening?" he groaned. "It's seeing your soul," Valkyrie whispered. "Measuring fire, your purpose. If it finds only fear..." Lucien closed his eyes. "I see the forge in my dreams. I hear the hammer in my blood. I came not to study it. I came to believe in it." The watcher paused, then lowered its helm in solemn nod. The trial 3 passed. The remaining watchers stepped aside, weapons withdrawn. The crystal encasing Durac's hammer cracked and shattered, revealing the tool of legend. It was not for the taking, only a symbol. The true reward was the passage revealed behind the tomb, a hidden door opening into the depths. The rune questers passed between the unmoving watchers, now still once more, guardians satisfied. Drazrung looked back once, at the shattered helm, the brass face. There you watched now in. The tomb of the Iron Watchers was silent once more. Chapter 8. The Fire Vault of Kadranc. The descent into Kadranc was like slipping into a wound in the world. Beyond the Iron Watcher's tomb lay a slanted shaft carved not by tools but by heat and time. A magma vein turned hollow, its stone warped into unnatural shapes by ancient volcanic fury. The rune questers passed through tunnels that throbbed with warmth, the air thick with the scent of scorched copper and old ash. Glowing veins of lava pulsed behind cracked basalt, casting flickering shadows like ghosts of a forgotten age. This was no hold. This was a forge grave. They moved cautiously, every step echoing into blackness that whispered back in languages none dared translate. Erda adjusted the dials on her eyelens, muttering, "Temperatures rising, runes are fluctuating. Something here's still alive, or active." "Magic," Valkyrie added, voice strained. "Old bound magic, heavy as lead. I can feel it pressing against my teeth." They passed through a tunnel where the ceiling had collapsed, revealing a vaulted chamber beyond, its walls marked by soot-blasted murals. Lucien paused, brushing soot from one image, a hammer suspended between two mountains, flames leaping from its head as stars burned in the background. "The forge, celestial," he whispered. "A myth, even among Dawi. It's said to hover at the edge of the material world, only touched when fate permits." Below the mural, carved in molten-grooved runes, was a name. Magmortak. The word burned with faint orange light, still warm to the touch. "This is it," Drazrung said. "This is the place." They descended a spiral stair of obsidian slick with condensation, arriving in a chamber vast enough to contain a Karak's worth of iron. The fire vault of Kadranc opened before them like a dragon's maw. Pillars of fused bronze rose toward a ceiling lost in smoke. The center of the chamber was dominated by a forged chain, suspended over a lake of magma by ancient chains as thick as tree trunks, their links etched with runes now dim and cracked. On the platform stood a massive anvil, dark and cracked with age, but unmistakably divine in origin. It radiated not heat, but memory, the sense of presence, of weight beyond stone or steel. They approached it slowly, reverently. Lucien examined the carvings. "This isn't the anvil of the ancestors, but it's where it was last forged. This is the mold, the first shaping. This is where gods and dwarfs worked as one." "Yes." Drazrung placed a hand upon the anvil. Visions struck like a hammerfall. Flashes of flame. A colossal figure of fire and stone. A forge beast with eyes like twin suns, runes dancing through the air, a voice like tectonic thunder. It is not ready. It must be cast again. In the north, in the wastes, where flame meets void. He staggered, caught by Kargun. I saw it. The last forging. It left this place. It was moved. North. But before they could speak further, a low, wet, clicking noise echoed across the chamber. Then another. Admetic. From the walls above the magma lake. Dozens of shapes detached from the shadows. At first glance, they resembled spiders, but wrong. Their legs were too long, too thin, joints bent the wrong way. Their bodies shimmered with patches of molten skin, as if they were burned open and never stopped burning. Each face was a melted dwarf mask, twisted into howls of pain. Eyes like hot coals stared hungrily. Borgy wraiths, Valthree breathed, trembling. Flesh left too close to godflame. Spirits twisted by centuries of failed forging. They didn't hiss. They didn't shriek. They sang. A high-pitched, dissonant chorus of screams stretched into sound. Not words. Just agony, resonant and beautiful in its madness. The wraiths attacked. Kargun met the first with a brutal swing of his axe, the blade slicing through one of the creature's legs, only for it to burst into molten blood, splashing across his face. He screamed, dropping to one knee as his beard caught fire. Drazrung yanked him back, swinging the oath axe in a wide arc. It crashed through one of the wraiths, splitting it in half. Its torso hissed and writhed like hot iron dropped in snow, still twitching as it fell into the magma below. Erda fired wildly, her pistol spitting flame, bolts punching holes through twisted faces and legs, but they kept coming. Lucien was dragged down, shrieking, one of the wraiths wrapping its legs around his torso and driving molten claws into his shoulder. He convulsed, eyes rolling back. "Get off him!" Valthree roared, unleashing a rune of shattering. The glyph struck the wraith like a thunderbolt, exploding it into shrapnel that tore into the walls and floor. Lucien rolled away, bleeding, gasping. More poured in. "We can't fight them all," Erda shouted. Druelrung grabbed her shoulder. "The chains, cut them, collapse the forge." She nodded, slapped a rune bomb to one of the main links. Valthree did the same on the opposite side. "Fall back," Erda screamed. They sprinted for the stairs as the forge wraiths skittered and howled after them. At the top, she turned and detonated the charges. The explosion lit the entire chamber in blinding orange. The anvil platform snapped its chains and collapsed into the magma, sending up a plume of molten fire that reached the ceiling, consuming a dozen wraiths mid-leap. The rest burned, twisted, screamed as they fell. Then silence. The fire settled. The vault was still. The rune questers stood, gasping, bleeding, burned, but alive. They looked down at the now empty abyss where gods once forged fate. Braswell whispered, "North. We go north." And somewhere, far beneath the mountain, a new fire awoke. Chapter 9. Frost and Flame. The sun had become a rumor in the sky. In the far north, beyond the tattered edges of Kislev, beyond the jagged teeth of the troll country and the shattered glaciers of the world's edge, the landscape turned alien. The sky hung like a stretched skin of storm clouds, bleeding light through cracks that stank of ozone and madness. Wind screamed ceaselessly across the ice fields of Koldur, howling like the dead, bringing with them the stench of ash and warp taint. The rune questers pressed forward. Snow, if it could be called that, fell in black flakes, burnt and oily. The ice beneath their boots was not mere frozen water, but a warped blend of rime and fused bone, the remains of ancient battles turned into glaciers. Faces occasionally revealed themselves in the walls, half-frozen warriors from a dozen different ages, some still twitching in slow, eternal death. Lucien was coughing blood now. The wound he took in the fire vault had festered. His skin was pale, eyes ringed in purple. Still he marched, teeth gritted, one arm bound tightly in Erda's mechanical sling. "Something follows us," he rasped. Drazrung didn't answer. He already knew. Kagan had spotted them first. Figures on the ridgelines, barely visible through the flurries. Always distant, always watching, never approaching. Their outlines were wrong, too short, too broad, too still. Not greenskins, not men. Dawis Chaos-dwarf. The ambush came under the fractured remains of a half-buried fortress, its towers broken, its battlements twisted upward like blackened claws. The Rune questers were moving through a trench of ice when the sound of chanting began. It echoed from all directions, a guttural, grinding dirge in a language older than hate. Then the snow exploded. Cursed war machines erupted from the flanks, twisted constructs of brass and obsidian, crawling on crab-like legs, each belching gouts of green flame. Behind them came the cultists, chaos dwarfs clad in baroque armor of scorched iron, faces hidden behind bull-faced helms, beards bound in rusted wire and bone. Their eyes burned with sorcerous fire, and mutation writhed beneath their skin, flesh and machine fused by dark pact. Leading them was a sorcerer priest, his lower body a coiling mass of serpentine metal, dragging a staff topped with a still-keeping heart of stone. His face was stone too, cracked and shifting, marked with the sigils of Hashut. "The anvil shall be ours," he intoned. "Mortal fools, you bring it closer with every breath you draw, and we shall claim it from your corpses." Drazrung didn't answer. He charged. The oath-hacks met the first of the cultists with a roar of runes, cleaving through black steel and bone, cutting the dwarf in half from hip to neck. The severed torso writhed, screeching a spell even as it died. Fire burst from the corpse's mouth, catching Erda in the shoulder, cooking metal and flesh alike. She screamed, dropped to a knee and unloaded her pistol into the face of another attacker, splintering helm, skull, and spine in a single thunderous shot. Kargon barreled into a line of cultists, swinging his axe in wild, bone-splitting arcs. One struck him across the back with a mace crowned in teeth. Spines drove into his flesh and pulsed with black poison. Kargon roared, tore the mace free with a bloody hand, and caved in the attacker's skull with it. Lucian, fevered and half-delirious, gripped a charm of ancient silver and chanted words he barely understood. A shimmer of light burst outward, a warding shield that slowed the advance of the war machines just long enough for Valthree to act. The runesmith stood at the center of the trench, arms outstretched, chanting in Khazalid so old even the stones seemed to groan in recognition. His staff struck the ground and the ice split, a ring of golden flame roaring outward in a perfect circle. One of the war machines, half demonic, its mouth gnashing in endless hunger, stepped into the flame and exploded in a burst of screaming iron and fire, the demon bound within ripped apart by ancestral wrath. But the sorcerer priest remained untouched. He raised his staff, spoke a word that broke the sky, and Drazrung flew backward, smashing into a pillar of warped ice, bones cracking. "You are not worthy," the priest snarled. Drazrung rose, blood pouring from his nose, ribs shattered. "I am Drazrung Grudgebearer, king of Karak Varn, and you..." He hurled a throwing axe. It struck the priest's mouth, shattering his lower jaw in a spray of stone and black ichor. "Are nothing." The cultists faltered. The war machines sputtered. The runequesters surged forward. Kargun took down 3 more, soaked in blood, his mohawks smoldering. Erda collapsed one of the brass walkers with an explosive charge that tore half the trench apart. Lucian, face pallid, vomited blood and collapsed. Valthree shielded him with runes of iron light. The priest writhed, jawless, snarling in his demonic tongue. He raised his staff once more, but Drazrung was already there, axe rising high. The oath axe came down. Retile. Stone, flesh and spirit shattered beneath the final blow. The sorcerer priest of Hashut screamed without sound, his essence torn from the weave of reality. Silence followed. The cultists fled or died. The snow settled once more. They buried Lucian that night. His fever took him, despite all they did. The charm he had used burned away in his hand. His last words were of fire and a hammer and a light on the horizon that never reached him. Drazrung took a shard of the dead priest's staff, twisted and cracked, and added it to his belt. "A trophy?" Valtry asked. "No," the king said. "A warning." They turned north once more. To Refast, to Flame, toward the end. Chapter 10. The Sorcerer's Bargain. The wind changed before the land did. The Runequesters had grown accustomed to the endless, churning whiteness of the north, the biting cold, the shrieking winds, the corpses half buried in ice. But this was different. The snow began to fall upward. The sky peeled sideways, not with sound, but with color that should not exist. Blues that bled into violet, scarlet that tasted of iron and childhood memories. And then they saw it. A tower stood alone upon the glacier, not built, but grown, like a tumor of stone and thought. Its shape shifted when not directly observed, sometimes spiraling, sometimes jagged, sometimes like the inverted ribcage of some ancient god. Its apex pierced the clouds, or perhaps receded into them, or perhaps ended in the face of something that watched and smiled. None spoke as they approached. Even Skarnik fell silent, hiding beneath his cloak, muttering prayers to things he didn't believe in. The door opened itself. It unfolded like petals, revealing a spiral staircase lined with mirrors that showed not reflections, but memories. Half-remembered conversations, moments of guilt, triumph twisted into horror. Valtry staggered as he passed one that showed him forging a rune, the metal screaming, the rune breaking, a child's face melting in fire. I never forged that," he whispered, but none dared linger. At the top of the impossible stair sat a figure draped in flowing robes of shifting hue, blue, gold, crimson, green, a peacock of pain and elegance. A Tzeentchian sorcerer, his face veiled beneath a mask of polished bone shaped like a bird's skull. He lounged upon a throne made of living books, their pages turning of their own accord, whispering secrets in tongues both beautiful and horrifying. "Welcome," he said, voice layered with too many harmonies, like 5 people speaking at once. "I have been expecting you. Drazrung Grudgebearer, Slayer, Runesmith, Maker of Things, Breaker of Fate." Drazrung stepped forward, axe in hand. "You know why we've come." "Indeed," the sorcerer cooed. "The anvil of the ancestors, the last forge, the keystone of creation. You seek it like so many before you, yet unlike them, you carry a flame in your chest." The sorcerer tilted his head, sniffing the air. "Ah, the rune burns inside you. Divine, pure, and oh, how valuable." Drazrung growled, "You'll give us the location, nothing more." The sorcerer giggled. "Ah, dwarfs and their stone-spined pride. No. Knowledge is never free, not here." He gestured. The walls parted. Images flared in the void beyond. The anvil, hovering in a void of stars and fire, anchored between planes. A map burned across the sky, inked in lightning and memory. The location, the path, the price. "I will give you the path," the sorcerer said. "In return, I ask for a simple trade." Vida raised her gun. "Speak it fast, before I melt your tongue." The sorcerer smiled, unbothered. "Home memory? 1 precious piece. From each of you, plucked like a string. Painful, yes, but nothing fatal, only transformative." "No," Drazrung said. "We leave." "You will never find it alone," the sorcerer sang. "You will die in frost and flame. The anvil will wait another 1,000 years. Are you so proud, little king?" Silence. Then Skarnik stepped forward. "Take mine." All turned to him. "You really?" He grinned, hollow and mad. "Take my memory of her, the squig, my little beast. Take it. She was all I had, so it'll hurt." The sorcerer extended a hand with 12 fingers and touched Skarnik's forehead. There was a sound like tearing silk. Skarnik collapsed. When he rose, his eyes were hollow. What was I saying? What did I give you?" The sorcerer turned to Drazrung. "Now will the king pay." Drazrung looked at his companions. At Kargun, fists clenched, ready to kill. At Erda, trembling. At Valtri, whispering protective runes under his breath. Then he spoke a word. A ruin. A word not meant to be heard. It slammed into the chamber like a forge hammer. Banishment. The sorcerer screamed as the rune flared, burning blue and gold and red, melting the very architecture of the tower. Books wailed, mirrors shattered, the floor cracked, spewing chaos flame. "You dare!" the sorcerer howled as his body began to unravel. "Yes," Drazrung growled. "I do." The runequesters ran as the tower collapsed around them, images of futures that never were chasing them through the halls. Screams echoed, flesh turned to birds, then to fire, then to ash. They burst from the collapsing entrance just as the tower folded into itself with a whisper and a roar, vanishing from the earth as if it never was. Breathing hard, the group stood beneath a sky that had gone still. Skarnik sat, shaking, hollow. Drazrung stared north. He had seen the map. The real one, burned into his mind in that single moment of defiance. He knew the path, and now they followed it. Or perished. Chapter 11. The Dagger in the Forge. They reached Fireglass Pass under a bruised sky, the horizon streaked with veins of lightning that never ceased, the clouds eternally pregnant with ash and static. The land itself was shattered, a dead zone between realms, where the world bled magic from its open wounds. Glassy obsidian fields stretched like a frozen sea of knives, jagged shards erupting from the ground in crimson hues, pulsing faintly like dying embers. It had once been a trade artery between the mountain clans and the tribes beyond the northern steppes, before the War of Ashen Chains. Now it was a charred graveyard, littered with the rusting hulks of siege engines and the fossilized skeletons of beasts of burden fused into the stone. Ratsulu led the runequesters with caution. Every step echoed, every breath crackled in their lungs. Magic saturated the air thick and oily, tainting everything it touched. Yokumut went in silence, his axe dragging across the glass, trailing sparks. Erda scanned the ridgelines through the smoke, her pistol loaded and primed with a shell carved from the bone of a demon host. Valtri hummed under his breath, tracing warding runes in the air, his fingertips glowing faintly. Skarnik watched. Too quiet, too still. They camped in the ruins of a shattered watchtower. Its upper levels collapsed, its stones scorched black by a long-forgotten hellfire. The wind moaned through the cracks like a dying breath, and the fire burned in unnatural colors. Drazrung stared into the flames, something gnawing at his mind. He looked to Skarnik. The goblin sat apart from the others, sharpening a jagged dagger with calm, practiced strokes, His once wild eyes were glassy now, empty. Erden approached, low voice. "He's not been right since the sorcerer's tower. Gave up a memory," Drazrung muttered. "A piece of himself. But what did it take in return?" The attack came just before dawn. A horn blast, low and droning, rolled through the pass like thunder across an empty plain. The world turned red with warning. From the ridgelines, brazen lights flared, and then the chaos descended. Chaos doors, dozens of them, clad in scale armor fused with flesh, their faces hidden behind horned helms carved into the snarling visage of Hashut. Their beards smoked with brimstone. Behind them came twisted artillery, magma cannons, pulled by iron-scaled bull centaurs, shrieking in pain and rage. And at the head, wearing a robe of living chains and wielding a hammer made from a screaming skull, strode a demon-smith of the Black Forge. "Drazrung Grudgebearer," he bellowed, voice like a furnace. "The price is due. The run must burn." Drazrung spun towards Skarnek. The goblin was gone. A rune was scrawled into the ash where he had been sitting, drawn in his own blood. Summoning. A gate. A beacon. Betrayal. Rage surged through Drazrung, hot and unrelenting. "He sold us out!" The ground exploded as the first cannon fired, molten glass and stone turning to shrapnel. A shell struck the tower wall, sending stone and steel flying. A dwarf screamed, one of the throng, torn in half by red-hot debris. Karun roared and leapt into the fray, swinging his axe with berserker fury, carving through chaos dwarfs like wheat. One caught him in the leg with a war-pick. It sank deep, snapping bone. Kargun howled, broke the attacker's neck with a headbutt, blood pouring down his face. Erda dropped into a firing stance, unleashing blast after blast from her pistol. One bullet struck a chaos dwarf square in the eye slit, the back of his helm blowing out in a fountain of gray matter. Another shot missed, ricocheted into a magma cart, which exploded in a pillar of fire, engulfing 3 warriors and a shrieking bull centaur. Malfrey stood in the middle of the chaos, his rune staff planted like a banner, drawing glyphs in the air that burst with radiant light. One symbol struck the demon-smith square in the chest. His robes ignited, the chains screaming in chorus. But the enemy kept coming. The battle turned desperate. Bodies fell like stone statues shattered in madness. Dwarfs and traitorkin hacked and tore and screamed. Fire rained from above as artillery pounded the pass, turning the glass fields into lakes of molten agony. Bakyen waded through the blood, searching. And there, slipping between the bodies, creeping toward the edge of the chaos. Skirn. He clutched something in his clawed hand, a shard of the Anvil's map, torn from Lucien's journal before they buried him. Drazrung surged forward, catching the goblin just as he reached the ridge. Skarnek turned, grinning, eyes wide and tearless. "They offered me a memory," he hissed. "They gave her back, my squig. I see her again, in my dreams. I just had to lead you here." Drazrung didn't speak. He drove the iron oath-axe through Skarnek's chest. It split ribs like dry wood. The goblin spasmed, mouth open, the final breath hissing out as blood bubbled up and over his teeth. "Dream of nothing," Drazrung growled. He turned just as the daemon-smith hurled a molten chain of fire toward him. The king raised his axe. The chain wrapped around the blade and shattered, the runes on the oath-axe burning blue, dispelling the demon magic. Drazrung charged. He slammed into the daemon-smith like an avalanche, blade to blade, sparks flying as god-forged axe met warp-tainted hammer. The daemon-smith roared, a gout of flame belching from his helm. Drazrung ducked, spun, and drove the axe into the daemon-smith's belly, cutting through plate, muscle, and magic. The traitor-kin staggered. Drazrung yanked the axe free and brought it down on his neck, severing the head in a single blow. The body convulsed, crumpled, flames flickering out. And with their leader dead, the Chaos Dwarves wavered, then broke. The street turned to rout. Silence fell, as the last screams died across the glass. Dozens dead. Kargan limped, blood-soaked, face ash-streaked. Erda lay half-conscious beneath a collapsed wall, 2 fingers burned to bone. Valthri's beard was scorched, his eyes glowing faintly from overuse of rune magic. They had survived, but the dagger had struck deep. The rune questers buried Skarnik beneath glass and rock, without words or stone. Drazrung stood over the grave. He didn't mourn. He only whispered, "The forge awaits, and so does vengeance." Then they marched, the fires of Fireglass Pass smoldering behind them, toward a future red with flame and oath. Chapter 12. The Trial of Stoneblood. Chains clinked like mocking laughter in the darkness. Drazrung Grudgebearer stood against the weight of black steel manacles wrapped around his wrists and ankles, every link runed with binding glyphs older than memory. He could barely breathe. The air was thick with ash and sweat, hot as forge breath. His beard was scorched, his armor stripped to bare mail, blood crusted on his brow. Both behind and before him, in iron-barred cells hewn into the jagged walls of a volcanic cavern, hundreds of eyes watched him in silence. Dwarf, but not Dawi of Karak. These were exiles, cast-offs of broken holes, offshoot clans, outcasts and survivors. Some wore tribal tattoos, others bore scars shaped like runes carved in hate. All were prisoners of the same host, the Stoneblood clan, dwarfs exiled long ago for crimes real and imagined, who had made their home in the lava-choked deeps of the Furnace Hollow. And now they were ruled by combat. Erda and Valthri had been taken separately. Kargan was missing, presumed dead or sold to gladiators. Drazrung alone remained in one piece, shackled and forced into a pit of fire and cheering madness. The arena of the Unveiled Oath. It was a circle of obsidian and basalt, rimmed with spikes and molten streams that glowed orange, red in carved gutters. Runes on the walls flickered, recording names and deeds in real time, magic and tradition entwined in cruel permanence. Above the arena, seated upon a black stone throne layered with skulls and bronze, sat Thane Erdak Stoneblood, a brute of a dwarf with a beard like iron wire and skin like cooled lava. His eyes were ringed with war paint and fury, and his voice boomed like a drumbeat. "This," he snarled, raising his gauntlet, "is the Oathbreaker King, the fool who dares chase myths through ash and snow. He seeks the anvil of the ancestors." The crowd laughed, cruel, bitter. Let him prove his worth in the trial of Stoneblood. Let his blood water the stone. The gates opened. Out stepped 3 opponents. The first was a hammer-wielding brute, a former Runesen driven mad by war, his flesh studded with nails, his mouth sewn shut. The second, a twin-axe berserker with no eyes, guided only by sound and memory. The third, a beast not quite dwarf, not quite machine, flesh fused with bronze, a living furnace, a fire-born abomination created in the crucible of exile. Drazrung's chains were removed, and his iron oath-axe tossed into the arena with disdain. It hit the ground near him, glowing faintly. He picked it up slowly, eyes never leaving his foes. The first lunged. Drazrung sidestepped, letting the brute's hammer crash into the obsidian, sending up a spray of molten sparks. The king twisted, slammed the butt of the oath-axe into the back of the Runesen's knee. A crunch. A howl. As the brute turned, Drazrung brought the axe around in a wide arc, The blade took off the mad dwarf's head clean, spraying blood across the arena. The crowd roared. And second came fast, silent. Twin axes danced like scythe blades, singing through the air. Drazrung blocked the first strike, but the second caught his thigh, slicing through flesh. He grunted, parried a follow-up, then dropped low, slamming his shoulder into the blind warrior's gut. They grappled. Steel shrieked. Sweat and blood mixed on blackstone. Drazrung bit down on his pain, slammed his forehead into the berserker's nose. Bone crunched, teeth flew. As the fighter reeled, Drazrung hooked the oath axe under his ribs and heaved upward, splitting him from gut to sternum. The corpse crumpled. Entrails steamed. Silence fell. Then came the third. The fireborn. It didn't run. It strode. Every step hissed as molten footprints marked its path. Its arms were wrapped in bronze gauntlets, fused with meat, and its face. No face. Just a burning mask etched with runes of hatred and agony. It raised its fists. One erupted in a gout of flame. Drazrung charged before it could react. They collided, flesh to fire, steel to rune. The king screamed as flame scorched his arm, mail melting into skin. The fireborn brought its fist down. Drazrung caught it on his axe shaft, wood and metal searing and twisted. With a snarl, he drove his knee into the creature's groin. No effect. It retaliated, biting his shoulder, molten teeth piercing muscle. He roared in fury, broke free, and headbutted the thing's mask. Cracks spidered across the bronze. The fireborn shrieked. Drazrung threw his axe into the air, spun once, caught it by the blade, and drove the haft through the cracked mask with both hands. The weapon pierced eye socket and brain alike. The fireborn spasmed, its chest bursting with flame. Drazrung leapt back as it detonated in a storm of molten gore. Silence again. Then the crowd roared. Stoneblood dwarves barraged, banged shields, shouted oaths. Thane Erdak stared, then nodded. "You bled the pit. You proved the flame." He stood, descended into the arena, and offered Drazrung a bloody hand. "We may not believe in your gods or your Anvil, Grudgebearer," Erdak growled, "but we believe in blood and honor, and you've earned both." Drazrung gripped the hand, sweat and blood dripping from his brow. "Then fight beside me," he rasped, "and we'll earn vengeance, together." The stone bloods roared their answer. "Sang," Estiel sang, and the king walked forward, now not alone, but with exiles at his side, brothers in blood, ready to carve fate into fire. Chapter 13. Secrets beneath the ancestral vault. The sea of claws churned overhead, a blackened mirror of storm and wrath. Waves smashed against ice-encrusted cliffs with relentless violence, sending geysers of salt and sleet high into the wind-screamed air. Beneath this fury, hidden under centuries of rockfall and forgotten lore, the rune questers descended into Karak Varn, the ancestral vault. It was not on any chart. No Dawi scholar had ever confirmed its existence, and none of the exiled clans had dared approach. It was a myth, wrapped in silence, whispered among tomb guardians and rune scribes as the place of the first silence, the place where the gods once spoke and then ceased. They found it behind a waterfall that froze mid-tumble, its cascade locked in place by ancient runes of elemental stasis. The water became a curtain of crystal teeth, and behind it a door of smooth obsidian marked with a single seared sigil, the flame-bound rune of Grungni. Trune's rune burned in answer. The door groaned to open, not pushed, but invited. They passed into blackness. Karak Varn was not like the other holes. There were no banners, no drinking halls or warrior shrines. This place was pure function, forges, galleries of script, rune vaults stacked like tombs and catacombs of memory. No heat, yet the air thrummed with dormant energy. Runes pulsed faintly along the walls, tracing lines of ancient magic into infinity. They followed the path of flame. At the vault's heart stood a great dome, supported by columns of polished black steel. Runes inlaid with gold and silver spiraled across the dome like a celestial map. Beneath it lay a dais of unbreakable stone, and atop it a single monolithic book, a codex bound in iron, too heavy to lift, its pages made of hammered gold leaf, each etched with runes that shimmered as if written in blood and starlight. Drazrung approached, and the runes ignited. A single page turned. The script shifted into readable Kazalit, the language of stone and oath. And what it told was not legend. It was origin, and the world was yet unshaped, and chaos clawed at the edges of stone. Rune descended into the womb of flame. He struck the first anvil from the heart of the world forge, beneath the eye that watches. With the hammer of soul metal, he forged the pillar of will, the anvil of the ancestors, binding time, flame, and fate into form. It is not merely a tool. It is a promise, a god's final act before silence, the last light before the shadow. Drazrung staggered, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. He turned another page. Images appeared, schematics of the anvil itself, layered in divine geometry. Instructions not just for shaping runes, but for reshaping reality. Uthri read beside him, his voice hollow with awe. This is not forging as we know it. This is creation. This is Genesis magic. The anvil of the ancestors is a fragment of the world before the gods fell silent. Bury it, Erda asked, her voice hushed. Why hide this from the clans? Rasflan whispered, because it's not meant for all hands. A final page turned. This one did not glow, it burned. Etched in blood gold, it showed a map, a real, shifting map, locked in 3 dimensions, projecting outward from the codex. It hovered, spinning slowly in the air, revealing coordinates deep within the chaos wastes, beyond mortal realms, a place not on any chart. There was a name, Valzarik, the forge between stars, and beneath it one final line of runes, ancient beyond reckoning. The worthy may strike the anvil, one of flame, one of grudge, one of sacrifice. One who carries the rune of the first will. The rune within Drazrung's chest flared, pulsing in time with the forelight above. Then the chamber trembled. The walls screamed, not in voice but in resonance. Something had noticed, something outside time. The seal was broken. From the corners of the vault, stone guardians stirred, massive constructs in the shape of bearded dwarves, their eyes glowing with ancestral fire. But they did not attack. They bowed. One by one, they knelt before Drazrung, acknowledging not merely a king, but a bearer of Grigny's final oath. Valfra turned to his battered company, Valthri, Erda, and the remaining Stonebloods. We know now what the anvil is. Gods help us, Erda whispered. We have to reach it before chaos does. Drazrung clenched his fist over his chest, where the rune still pulsed. Then we march into hell, and we forge our fate in fire. The vault closed behind them as they left. Above, the sea of claws raged on, unaware of the fire now walking beneath its waves. Chapter 14. The Rune That Whispers. The storm had no name. It howled across the black glaciers like a hunted god, filled with voices that weren't made to be heard, whispers that bled through steel, skin, and sanity. The sky above the northernmost edge of the Chaos wastes swirled with violet clouds and streaks of lightning that forked sideways, never touching the earth. The rune questers moved through this warped tundra like shadows in a waking nightmare, cloaked in frost and purpose. Their destination was a rumor carved into the map from the Ancestral vault, an ancient runestone set at the world's edge where no beast roamed, no wind blew straight, and the stars blinked like open eyes. They found it in a crater of glass and bone. The stone rose 50 feet high and half as wide, a monolith of slate-black obsidian veined with glowing silver runes that pulsed in a heartbeat, not in sync with any living thing. Around its base were the husks of those who had come before, mutated corpses, their mouths frozen mid-scream, their bodies twisted into parodies of reverence. Some still knelt, others had fused into the stone itself. Drazrung stood before it, breath misting in the air, eyes narrowed. The runes shifted as he looked. They rearranged themselves, not visibly, but in the corner of perception, a maddening trick of vision and meaning. "No one touch it," Valthree warned. "It's alive, sentient, maybe even older than Grunny's silence." "It's calling," Drazrung said, voice low. "Not to all of us, just me." He stepped forward. The world tilted. Dream, not slumber, not illusion. A forge-shaped dream, where time melted into smoke and the sky burned with scripture. Drazrung stood barefoot upon a floor of molten iron. His body was whole, his wounds gone, his armor gone. Only the rune in his chest remained, pulsing, feeding the dream. Before him towered the runestone, now fully awake, its runes burning white-hot. It spoke without voice. "You carry the mark of will, but will is not strength. Will is not rage, it is purpose in the face of oblivion." 3 shadows emerged from the mist. His father, face burned, beard torn, screaming as he fell in Karak Varn's last defense. Lucian, hands outstretched, blood bubbling from his lips, the journal page fluttering from his grasp. Skarnik, eyes hollow, dagger in hand, whispering words that no longer made sense. They moved as one. Drazrung raised his fists, but his axe was gone. No weapon, no shield, only memory. The first strike came from his father, an armored fist to the chest, sending him crashing back into the molten floor. Pain lanced through him. "You led them to death." Lucian's voice twisted. "You took knowledge and gave it to ruin." Skarnik's laughter. "Broken glass. You trusted a goblin king, how wise." Drazrung screamed, leapt to his feet and struck back with fists and fire. He fought his past in silence. Flesh tore, bones snapped, memory bled. Each time he struck down a phantom, another took its place, more of the dead, more of the damned, until he was surrounded, a ring of ghosts, all he had failed, all who had fallen beneath his banner. They closed in. He fell to his knees. Then the rune in his chest flared. He remembered. Not their deaths, their reasons. His father's stand to protect, not survive. The Shang's sacrifice, to see the truth carried forward. Even Skarnik's betrayal, born of a pain so deep it twisted his soul. Drazrung rose. "I carry them all," he whispered, "not as guilt, but as oath." The ghosts froze. The rune flared brighter than the sky, and the dream shattered like glass. He woke, gasping, frost and blood on his lips. The runestone before him now glowed golden, its surface smooth, silent. Then a new rune etched itself into the stone, searing through obsidian with light, bold of skyfire. Below the words, a sigil, a directional glyph, pointing northwest toward a jagged range of sky-piercing mountains. Erdev approached, voice tight with awe. You passed. Drazrung nodded, wiping blood from his nose. It showed me what I am. Oh, what's that? He looked toward the distant range, where a line of fire danced along the ridgelines, as if lightning had carved a stairway to the stars. A king of ghosts, he said, and a forge yet to be lit. And so they marched again, toward the vault. Tuck Skyfire. Chapter 15. War upon the Wastes. The wastes welcomed them with screams. Not from throats, not from lungs, but from the land itself. The wind howling with voices that had never been born, the ground trembling with laughter that had never been joyous. The sky overhead churned in constant, unnatural motion, violet and green clouds laced with pulsing red veins like blood vessels in a diseased eye. No sun pierced it, no stars looked down, only the great ever-burning aurora known as the Eye of Ruin, swirling above like a watching god. This was the threshold to the vault of Skyfire, but the way was not unguarded. Ahead lay the howling plains, a desolate expanse where the ice had cracked into floating shards of black glass, and rivers of congealed blood wove through valleys carved by madness. The Rune questers stood at its edge, a ragged band of warriors and exiles. Drazrung's armor was dented and scorched, but his eyes burned with clarity. The rune in his chest pulsed stronger now, guiding him with certainty. Behind him stood Erda, her mechanical arms sparking with overused circuits. Valthry, grim-faced and pale, his runestaff glowing faintly, and the Stoneblood warriors, hardened, silent, and ready. A horn sounded, not for them, but from the dark. From the north, the enemy came. Chaos warriors, their armor sculpted into cruel parodies of man and daemon, clad in rusted plate adorned with symbols of the dark gods, shields fashioned from bone and flesh, swords that whispered when drawn. Behind them, beastmen, twisted things, half goat, half hate, braying and snarling, forming a tide of primal savagery. They marched not with discipline, but with hunger. At their center strode a champion of chaos undivided, a monstrous figure cloaked in flayed skin and bearing a hammer that bled smoke. His helm bore 4 horns, one for each god, and his mouth had been sewn shut with iron wire, forcing him to speak through the voices of those he killed. They sought the Anvil, or to destroy it. They could not be allowed to pass. Drazrung did not wait. He lifted the iron oak axe, its ruins burning like sunlight through storm clouds. "To fire and blood," he growled. The Stonebloods roared their response, and the wastes exploded into war. The first clash came like thunder. Drazrung met a chaos warrior in full charge, his axe carving through shield and skull in a single hammering blow. The runes burned white-hot, cutting through chaos taint like flame through parchment. He moved with righteous fury, each swing dropping enemies like felled trees. Gore painted the glass beneath his boots. Erda took the high ground. Her rifle snapped and barked, each shot detonating heads, severing limbs, punching holes in warped helms. But they were many, too many. A beastman lunged at her, wielding a club of fused femurs. She spun and fired. The shot hit its jaw, tearing half its face away, but still it came. She screamed, raised her mechanical arm, caught its weapon in the gears, and crushed it, and fell twitching. Valthry stood at the heart of the battlefield, his rune staff raised high, chanting incantations of binding and destruction. Symbols formed in the air, each one bursting into flames, or chains, or spears of light. A group of charging chaos warriors hit his wards and were turned inside out, blood and armor scattering across the battlefield. But for every 10 they killed, 20 more surged forward. The champion came. He waded through corpses, hammer held in one hand, his other trailing a chain of bladed tongues that lashed out, tearing through flesh and armor indiscriminately. Drazrung turned to meet him, knowing this was the fulcrum of the battle. They collided with a sound like a mountain cracking. Steel clashed against daemon-forged iron. Sparks and blood flew. The champion struck first, his hammer crashing into Drazrung's shield, shattering it in half. The second blow knocked the king from his feet. He rose with blood in his beard, blocking the third with the haft of the oath axe. He countered. The blade carved a deep gash across the champion's side, exposing a mass of churning, screaming flesh that fought to escape. The wound sealed itself seconds later. The champion hissed through sewn lips. They fought like gods. Already. Around them the Stonebloods were dying, one by one, but not before taking 5, 10, 15 enemies with them. The plain was a cauldron of gore and ruin, black glass shattered beneath soaked boots, flames rising from spellfire and explosive powder. Erda ran dry. She threw her rifle aside and took up a fallen axe. Balthri, spent, collapsed to his knees, blood dripping from his nose and ears. His last spell froze a dozen beastmen in time, trapping them in stasis even as they screamed. The champion knocked Drazrung down again, this time crushing his pauldron and breaking 3 ribs. The rune flared, desperate. "You cannot win," the champion whispered through blood and magic. Drazrung spit in his face. "I'm not here to win." He rolls with everything left, and brought the oath axe down. It struck the champion's helm with a force that shattered sound. The metal split. The skull within burst, and the body fell, lifeless. The battlefield fell silent. The remaining Chaos warriors faltered, then fled, broken by the death of their god-chosen leader. The beastmen followed, braying in confusion and fear, scattering into the howling winds. Only the rune questers remained. The plains burned. Blood soaked the ground. Drazrung fell to one knee, breathing hard, surrounded by corpses of gods and monsters. Erda limped to his side, dragging her burnt arm behind her. Valthri coughed blood but smiled. They had won. And, ahead, on the far edge of the plain, a stare of fire rose into the clouds. The path to the vault of Skyfire had opened. Chapter 16. The Vault of Skyfire. The staircase was made of living flame. Each step was a rune of fire, a platform of weightless heat suspended in a sky with no sun, just the storm-wreathed void above, swirling with the echoes of shattered stars. The stairs rose into nothingness, and still the rune questers climbed. The survivors of the howling plains were few. Drazrung bore wounds across his ribs and thigh, his breath short and hot with blood. Erda walked with one arm in a sling of her own invention, her gun discarded, her eyes sunken from fever. Valthri limped, his rune staff cracked, the glyphs along his arms scorched and smoking from overuse. None spoke. There was no need. The sky had split open for them. The vault called. At the stair's end was a door of light, a circle, not a gate, not a wall, but a threshold. It pulsed as Drazrung approached, resonating with the rune in his chest. He stepped through, and reality folded inward. They emerged into the Forge realm, not a place, a pocket of divinity, a sanctum shaped by will and memory. The sky was a dome of starfire, a galaxy swirling with forgotten constellations that moved not by orbit but by purpose. The floor was obsidian veined with molten silver, crisscrossed by rivulets of energy, runes pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeat of a god long silent. At its center floated the anvil of the ancestors. It defied shape. Its form was solid, yet ever-shifting, built from stone, steel, and something older, humming with a frequency that spoke not to the ears but to the soul. It hovered above a dais inscribed with the runes of creation. Grungni's breath, Valaya's mercy. And, surrounding the anvil, were the statues of the ancestor gods themselves, 12 figures cast from bronze and fire, each larger than a building, each watching with eyes that shimmered like galaxies. Yet they did not move. They waiting. Rachan stepped onto the dais. The moment his boot touched the central rune, the anvil breathed. Light burst from its base, swirling into a column that touched the heavens above and the abyss below. The statues stirred, just slightly. Not motion, attention. They recognized him. Valtry gasped and dropped to one knee. "By the forge, it lives!" The rune in Drazrung's chest flared violently, matching the pulse of the anvil. He fell to his knees, teeth clenched as if a second heart had ignited within his ribcage. It's calling me," he hissed. "It wants to be wielded." Ada stepped forward cautiously. "Then do it. Forge whatever you came for." But the anvil did not give freely. The voice came from nowhere. Not heard, but inhaled, a breath in the marrow. "You are not the first. Many have reached. None have grasped." A vision hit them all like a tidal wave. Hundreds of kings, champions, madmen, and prophets had stood here before. Dwarfs who bled for runes, humans who burned for glory, even daemons screaming defiance. All had failed. All had been unmade. The anvil showed them crushed souls, erased by pride or weakness. Their remnants haunted the fire streams below the floor, their essence trapped in unending purgatory. Then the voice again. To forge upon the anvil of the ancestors is to shape fate. To strike, one must be bound by oath greater than life, greater than death. Drazrung rose slowly, the oath axe in hand. "I've carried every death, every failure, every betrayal. I've walked through daemons and gods, and I do not carry this axe for power." He looked up at the anvil. "I carry it for those who never got to forge their fate." He stepped into the forge. Light. The statues glowed, eyes aflame with ancient memory. The anvil lowered, setting itself upon the dais, now open and ready. But the price had not yet been paid. The ground split. The guardian rose. Born from molten metal and rune fire, it stood 12 feet tall, shaped like a dwarf in full battle armor but without flesh. Its eyes burned like suns, and in its hands was a hammer made from the first meteor to strike the world. All must be tested in the forge before they wield it. Drazrung stepped forward. "I am ready." The duel was unlike anything mortal. The guardian swung with planetary weight. One strike shattered the floor, sending magma and starlight bursting upward. Drazrung barely dodged, rolling beneath the arc and slashing at the knee. Sparks flew, no damage. Another swing. Drazrung blocked with the oath axe. The force launched him backwards, ribs fracturing. He stood again. He charged. Clashed. Each impact lit the forge with arcs of divine fire. Sparks burst in clouds. Time stuttered. The statues leaned forward. Valthrys screamed spells of support, but none worked. This was a trial of the soul. Drazen blooded, roared, remembered. He struck at memory, his father, his fallen allies, his sins. And then he screamed a name. Gozne. The rune in his chest exploded. The otax caught flame, not of heat, but of divine will. He struck one final blow. The axe carved through the guardian's hammer, its helm, its chest. The construct shattered like brittle iron, collapsing in silence. The anvil ignited. It was not heat. It was light, weight, meaning. The voice returned. You are found worthy. Now forge. What will you shape? Drazrung stepped forward. He placed the oath axe upon the anvil and began to forge. Each strike rang not in air, but in history. And across the world something shifted. Regresses vanished. Old wounds throbbed. And far above, the ancestor gods watched and nodded. Chapter 17. The Spiritsmith. The first strike rang like the heartbeat of a world. Molten light rippled across the vault of skyfire, dancing through runes etched into the firmament, each pulse answering the anvil's song with a chord older than memory. Drazrung stood at the center of it, hunched over the god-forged anvil, the iron oath axe reshaped into a raw, glowing form. Every swing bled fire and purpose, his breath shallow, his arms trembling from the strain of channeling divine intent through mortal flesh. Around him, the forge realm shimmered and warped, the boundary between material and immaterial thinning like a worn blade. And then, everything stopped. The hammer froze midair. The air turned still. The stars above blinked out one by one. Even the ancestor statues ceased their subtle breath of magic. The forge dammed. A shadow bloomed from the heart of the anvil itself, liquid smoke and starlight coalescing into form. The temperature dropped, not to cold, but to absence, the sensation of everything being drawn inward. Then it spoke, not in words, but in runes carved into thought. Who dares awaken the forge eternal? The shape solidified. Drazrung lowered his hammer and stared into the eyes of a legend. A dwarf, cloaked in flame and runes, floated just above the anvil. His beard was braided with chains of star metal, and where his face should have been was a mask of solid iron etched with the names of 100 clans. Upon his brow rested the rune crown, a circlet shaped like a ring of anvils. Rocker Flamerot, the first runesmith king, the Forgebinder, the one who had struck the first rune of existence into the bones of the world. Even Drazrung, hardened king and oath-bearer, fell to one knee. Flamerot, he breathed. The spirit's voice was fire scraping across soulstone. You seek to shape the final rune, the rune of binding will. To do so, a piece of your soul is not enough. An anvil never accepts single flame. It demands two. Drazrung rose, staring into that eyeless mask. What do you mean? The vault darkened further. The anvil flickered. A soul must be given, not in death alone, in totality. One bound to you, one loyal, their spirit must feed the rune's final fire. Drazrung clenched his fists. I've paid enough. The mask tilted. Not enough for what you demand. You would forge fate. You would strike a rune that reshapes the world. This cannot come without sacrifice. A figure appeared beside the spirit, conjured in light and shadow. Exhaled, bruised, burned. Arm hanging in tatters of brass and bone. But standing, Drazrung took a step back. No. Flamerod's gaze turned. I mean, she walks with innovation, with creation, with will. She has chosen her path even when it doomed her. Take, Drazrung snarled. Take my soul, my body, my blood, but not hers. You are the hammer, she is the spark. One must become fire. Erda blinked, confused. Then her eyes widened. She had heard everything. Now, Drazrung moved toward her, but she held up her broken arm. Listen to me, she whispered, her voice cracking with pain and defiance. You know what we came here for, what you were made for. this is what it costs. Don't you dare insult me by trying to stop it. I won't let you die. You already watched the kingdom burn. Don't let it be for nothing. Tears traced streaks through soot on her cheeks. Her smile was broken, but there. I'm just an engineer, King. You're the forge. She limped forward and placed her hand on the oath axe. The runes flared in response. The forge roared back to life. Flame rod turned, slowly raising a spectral hammer. Do you accept the cost? Drazrung nodded once, jaw clenched, heartbreaking. Erdo leaned in and whispered, "Make something worth it." The hammer fell. A shockwave rippled across the forge realm, an explosion of soul fire so potent that the sky above cracked, exposing a realm of pure flame and memory. Ida screamed once. Then she was gone. Nothing remained but her gauntlet, fused to the anvil's side, still steaming, still sparking. Perfectly. The rune on the oath axe changed. It glowed, not gold, not red, but white, pure, burning, complete. The rune of binding will. Drazrung stood silent, hands shaking. Flamewrought spoke one last time. You have forged what none before could. You are the Rune King. Now carry it into fire. Then he vanished, like smoke from a quenched forge. Drazrung took the axe. It pulsed with Erda's warmth, her spirit, her choice. Behind him, Valtteri wept. The vault of Skyfire opened its final gate. Ahead lay vengeance. Ahead lay reckoning. Ahead lay the last war. Chapter 18. The Anvil Forged. The forge no longer burned with heat. It pulsed with presence. The vault of Skyfire had changed. The statues of the ancestor gods loomed larger now, their eyes lit not with passive fire but with judgment. The dome above roiled with stellar winds, galaxies blinking in and out of existence with every breath of the anvil. Time was not linear here. It folded, flexed, and pulsed around Drazrung like a smith's bellows. He stood alone before the anvil of the ancestors, his arms bloodied to the elbow, his veins glowing with rune light. The iron oath axe, once the weapon of his bloodline, now reforged with the essence of Erda's sacrifice, rested across the anvil's face like a sleeping god. Its head was carved with a new glyph, the rune of binding will, final and complete. Drazrung's every breath drew in molten truth. With each exhale, runes ignited along the floor, spelling out the words of legacy. Blood for the oath, soul for the flame, grudge given, glory earned, God bound. The cost had been high, too high. He gripped the haft, knuckles white. He had watched her vanish. Erda, inventor, fighter, friend, taken into the anvil as fuel for the rune. She had not screamed in fear but in defiance, giving herself for a future only Drazrung could now build. The flame in his chest was no longer his alone. Her will burned beside his. The forge awaited. He lifted the axe, not as a weapon, but as a hammer. With his left hand, he reached into the glowing crucible beside the anvil. Not metal, not ore, memory. It poured out of the crucible like liquid starlight, becoming shapes in his hands, faces of the fallen, the runes of the past, the names etched into the book of grudges. His father, torn in two by greenskin axe, Dushan, bleeding out for knowledge, Kargon, burned but unbroken. Erda, now part of the forge. He placed the memory upon the anvil and struck. The vault ignited with the first blow. A pillar of golden fire roared from the center of the realm to the endless dome above, splitting the sky. The statues of the ancestor gods moved, leaning in, watching with breathless focus. The second strike split the stone beneath the anvil, opening fault lines that spilled light and sorrow in equal measure. The third blow rang not in air, but in the hearts of every dwarf alive. Across the old world and beyond, Dawi dropped their tools, their weapons, their tankards. They heard the sound. They felt the oath take root. Let all who have been wronged rise. Let all who have fallen be remembered. Let all grudges be known. The fourth and final blow was not struck with strength, but with sacrifice. Drazrung closed his eyes. In his mind he saw Karak Varn, broken and smoldering, overrun with Grobian sorrow. He saw the black maw, the stone bloods, the fireglass betrayal, the skyfire forged. He saw the world he had walked, and the one he would now shape. I am the flame that bears your names. The final strike fell. The rune took shape in fire. It exploded outward, a shockwave of divine fire that consumed the entire vault, sweeping across statues, runes, walls, and even time itself. Every god form bowed. Every star bent. And when the light cleared, Drazrung stood atop a rebuilt dais, the anvil pulsing beneath his feet. The axe was gone. In its place, his right arm now glowed with living runes, forged directly into bone and soul, radiating with power that no mortal should carry. He was no longer just Drazrung Grudgebearer. He was Drazrung, Anvil-King, not crowned, forged. A voice echoed from the depths of the forge realm. Deep, final. It is done. The rune is bound. The will is forged. Now carry it into the world. Let flame answer oath. Rasharum turned. Vatri stood at the edge of the dais, eyes wide with awe and sorrow. She's gone, the runesmith whispered. No, Drazrung said, his voice like embers. She burns inside the world now. He looked to the vault doors as they groaned open, not into the realm of fire, but back into the mortal world. Into war. Into reclamation. Behind him, the anvil cooled. The runes dimmed. But the flame did not die. It simply waited. Chapter 19. The War of Returning Flame. The sky burned with the fire of vengeance. As Drazrung Anvil-King descended from the vault of skyfire, the very mountains shuddered beneath his boots. His body radiated heat, not from flame, but from the divine essence of the rune engraved into his soul, the rune of binding will. The winds whispered his name. The runes carved into his flesh pulsed like the embers of a world on the brink of reckoning. He did not descend as a petitioner. He came as a king reborn, and the world would know it. Their path back south was carved not by root, but by fire and war. In the lands of the Black Slate Holes, where dwarf clans once fought over scraps of lost honor and decades-old blood feuds, Drazrung strode into the council hall and drove the haft of his new hammer into the stone floor, splitting it down the middle. When the rune of binding will flared, all arguments ended. The stone thrones cracked beneath its radiance, and the ancient runes adorning the walls flared to life for the first time in centuries. The thanes bowed, some in fear, others in reverence, but all submitted. Your grudges burn cold, Drazrung said, his voice echoing like a forge hammer. Mine burns with purpose. Follow me, and we will reclaim not just our hold, but our birthright. Within 3 days, the Black Slate clans had rearmed. Within a week, they marched. In the Ashen Divide, home to the exiled Iron Hands, clans that had turned to rune sorcery and darkened steel, Drazrung stood before the rune spire, alone, with only Valthari at his side. A host of warriors clad in blackened plate greeted them, spears and crossbows trained on their hearts. Drazrung raised the anvil hammer. With a single strike into the ground, he split the obsidian stone, and from it rose 7 weapons, blades, hammers, and axes, each pulsing with glowing runes. They radiated heat that no flame could match, ancestral will given form. "These are not gifts," he said. "They are reminders. Join me, or these will be wielded by those who kill you." The iron hands knelt. The anvil traveled with him. Not the divine relic from Skyfire. It remained sealed, protected, but its power, embedded into Drazrung himself, allowed him to forge on the march. His hammer was a mobile forge of purpose, and at every stop he struck weapons from the bones of fallen daemons, from the melted blades of chaos champions, from the steel of shattered thrones. Each weapon forged was a rune-bound oath. Each warrior who wielded one was changed. Stronger, faster, unyielding. Not by sorcery, by legacy. And so the army of the returning flame was born. 10,000 dwarves from 5 lost holds. Rune mercenaries, flame-blooded oath-bearers, stone-blood berserkers, their armor etched with molten grudge runes. At their head, Drazrung, with his war cape of reforged chainmail and his hammer burning with the fire of the forge gods. They reached Karak Varn beneath a sky choked with storm. The hold was a ruin, its outer gates shattered, its towers broken. The stink of greenskin filth oozed from every crack, and the sound of drums echoed deep inside, the rhythmic, mindless thump of orcs dancing upon the bones of better men. Drone stood atop the ridge and raised his hammer. It pulsed once. Then he brought it down on the ground. The mountains screamed. A wave of force exploded outward, a sonic shock wave that flattened the outer Groby camps, snapping siege towers in half, blowing goblins apart in clouds of blood and teeth. "To fire and stone!" he roared. And his army answered. The dwarves charged not in lines, but in columns of living flame, weapons aglow with divine purpose. They tore into the orcs like a forged knife through old meat. Iron-blood clan thanes waded through black orc champions, their twin axes biting into green flesh and cracking tusks like brittle pottery. Stone bloods dropped from the ridges like boulders, their rune-bound armor glowing red-hot as they slammed into goblin ranks, crushing them beneath weighted fury. Balthrai stood at the rear, channeling earth runes, splitting the ground beneath squig pens and collapsing whole tunnels under waves of molten stone. Drazrung led the charge through the Gate of Chains, the same gate where his father had died. The same stone still bore the old king's blood. He smashed through it with a single swing. The enemy within, Groands Gut-Eater, a colossal orc warlord stitched together from parts of smaller orcs, waited atop the throne dais, a necklace of dwarf skulls swinging from his neck. He laughed as Drazrung entered, holding a slab-like cleaver in both hands. "You're too late, beard thing. This is my hold now." Drazlim didn't answer. He charged. Groands brought his cleaver down with a roar. Drazrung caught it with his hammer. Runes flaring, the cleaver shattered into rusted shards. He slammed his fist into the warlord's chest, cracking bone. Rosnag swung a fist. Drazrung ducked and drove the hammer upward into his jaw, snapping his neck with a crunch like collapsing stone. The orc fell, twitching. Drazrung turned to the throne. Still broken, still empty. He walked to it and placed his hammer upon the step. "I do not sit," he said aloud. "I forge." All across the hold, the last greenskins fell. The rune of binding will flared. And Karak Varn, broken no longer, burned with returning flame. Chapter 20. Oath of the Ancestors. The fires of Karak Varn burned brighter than they had in centuries. No longer wild, no longer desperate, they burned with purpose. Forged into order, fanned by unity, fed by vengeance fulfilled. The hold's once collapsed forges had roared back to life under Drazrung's hand, and the very air tasted of steel and smoke and legacy. Blood still stained the stone. The bodies of Groznag's horde had been piled in heaps outside the gates, doused in oil and set ablaze until their stink no longer tainted the mountain's breath. Dwarfs worked tirelessly, rebuilding what time, treachery, and war had shattered, bridging the inner halls with molten steel, reforging statues with runes that burned anew, and cleansing each chamber with holy flame. And at the center of it all, in the Hall of Oaths, beneath the towering gaze of Grungni's statue, stood Drazrung, Anvil-King. He was not dressed in royal regalia. He wore his battle-scarred forge mail, blood still crusted at the seams, soot smeared down his cheek. Across his right arm glowed the living runes of the Rune of Binding Will, pulsing with ancestral fire. At his back hung the anvil hammer, no longer just a weapon but a symbol, the key that had reshaped fate. In front of him, the Book of Grudges lay open on a pedestal of obsidian, its last page fresh. His promise was never to love his country or his kingdom. Valthry stood at his side, his robes torn, beard singed, eyes hollow from the cost of victory, but proud. Hundreds had gathered in the hall, representatives of every allied clan, from Blackslate to Stoneblood, from exile-born Iron Hands to Karak Varn's reborn warriors. None spoke. All watched. The ceremony of sealing was about to begin. Drazrung raised the hammer. The entire hall dimmed as the runes upon the stone floor, engraved generations ago by hands long turned to dust, flared to life, golden and glowing. A circle opened beneath the throne dais, revealing a shaft carved deep into the mountain's bones. Lava shimmered below, and a pedestal of stone rose slowly, upon which the portable anvil core, drawn from the forge realm and housed in a sacred cradle, now rested. The anvil has served its purpose, Drazrung spoke, his voice resonant. It forged a rune that bound the living to the dead, the past to the now. Through fire and sacrifice, we reclaimed what was lost, not only stone, but honor. He turned, staring into the crowd. It is not power that makes us Dawi. It is oath. And the anvil must sleep now, not as a weapon, but as a covenant. He raised the hammer high, called me in by the flame of Grungni's forge, by the blood of the fallen, by the will of the ancestors. I seal the rune of binding, and of bury it beneath mountain and memory. And I swear, so long as Karak Varn stands, no oath shall be broken again. He brought the hammer down. The anvil sank slowly into the mountain, lowered by chains inscribed with divine runes, drawn into a vault of solid rune stone. As it vanished into shadow, the runes on the chamber walls pulsed in unison. The platform sealed shut with a thunderous clash, molten glyphs locking in place. A final rune ignited above the seal, oath fulfilled. The silence was broken by a single chant, then another, then 1,000 voices rising as one. Anvil-King, Anvil-King, Anvil-King. The chant shook the walls. Valthra stepped forward, holding a new crown. Not gold, not gemmed, but forged from steel, obsidian, and soul fire, each point etched with the names of the fallen who had made it possible. Not a crown of vanity, but of remembrance. Drazrung dropped to one knee before the statue of Grune. The crown was placed upon his head. and the rune of binding will pulsed once more, resonating with the mountain, with the world, with the very bones of the ancestor gods. He rose, not as a wanderer, not as a grudge-bearer, but as Rune, High King of the Forgotten Forge. Outside, the winds changed. The black clouds above Karak Varn parted for the first time in a century, and from the sky above, a single shaft of golden light fell upon the stone, warm, silent, and final. The ancestors had spoken, and the age of oath had begun.